There is a moment in almost every close relationship when something shifts. It might be small, a tone of voice you hadn't heard before, a decision that seemed selfish, a reaction that caught you off guard, or it might be larger, a lie uncovered. A betrayal, a side of someone you didn't know existed, and in that moment a question rises: who is this person? Is this who they really are? Have they changed, or have I simply been blind? Jung's work keeps returning to moments like this, and his suggestion is unsettling. They haven't changed. You've just gotten close enough to see. Every human being carries what Jung called the shadow, the parts of themselves they hide from the world, and often from themselves. The closer you get to someone, the more of their shadow you encounter. This is not a flaw in the relationship. It is the price of intimacy. And the difficult part is this: the same is true of you. Every soul is, in a sense, half human, half ghost. The question is not whether you will encounter the ghost. You will. The question is what you do when you see it. We live in an age where morality has become something performative, curated identities, public virtue, outrage cycles that reward certainty and punish complexity. It becomes easy to forget a simple fact: no one has ever been purely good. Jung saw this clearly. He warned against one of the most dangerous tendencies in human psychology, the demand for moral purity in others and in ourselves. This is not the same as having standards. Standards are necessary, but the expectation that a person can be without contradiction, without shadow, without the capacity for harm. This is not moral clarity. It is fantasy, and it causes suffering, because when we expect purity, we interpret complexity as betrayal. We see normal human contradictions as evidence of failure. We spend our lives being disappointed by people who were never gods to begin with. They were just people carrying their own divided souls, doing what they could. This video is about learning to see people as they actually are, not to excuse harm, not to lower standards, but to stop being blindsided by the basic nature of human beings, that everyone carries a shadow, and the closer you get, the more you see. Many of us know this pattern. We meet someone, and they seem unusually good, attentive, principled, safe. Something in us relaxes. Finally, a good one. Then time passes, closeness reveals details, stress reveals habits, and suddenly there are cracks. They say something harsh, they act in a way you didn't expect, they reveal a smallness, a selfishness, a capacity for unkindness. And the shock is not just the behavior. The shock is the feeling. I didn't know them, but in Jungian terms, you encountered something you weren't looking for, their shadow. The shadow is the part of the personality that contains what we disown. Impulses we judge, emotions we suppress, motives that don't match the story we tell about ourselves. It is not evil, it is unintegrated. And every human being has one. There is an old saying: no man is a hero to his valet. Distance creates icons. Closeness creates humans. Jung takes this further. He suggests that intimacy itself is a kind of disillusionment. Not because love is false, but because closeness dissolves the fantasies that distance maintains. Get close enough, and no one can stay a symbol. Think of the people you've known longest. Your family, your partner, your oldest friend. They've seen your worst moments, your irritability, your small evasions. And you've seen theirs. This is why long-term relationships are difficult in a specific way, not only because romance fades, but because reality accumulates. The longer you know someone, the more you witness their contradictions. The question is not whether the people in your life will disappoint you. They will. The question is whether you can love what remains after the illusion is gone. Why do we have shadows at all? If the shadow causes so much trouble, why does it exist? Why aren't we simply integrated, transparent, whole? One way to understand this: the shadow is not a bug. It is a feature. In the tribal environments where human psychology took shape, survival depended on belonging. To be cast out was to die. So we learned, very early, to hide the parts of ourselves that might lead to rejection, aggression, selfishness, desire, envy. These are not modern inventions. They are part of our inheritance. They exist because, in certain contexts, they helped our ancestors survive. But they also threatened social cohesion, so we learned to suppress them, deny them, push them into the dark. This is how the shadow forms. It is not the absence of goodness. It is the collection of everything we have learned to reject about ourselves. And like anything in exile, it does not simply disappear. It waits, it festers. It finds ways to leak out, in dreams, in slip-ups, in those moments when we surprise ourselves and think, where did that come from? Jung's insight was that we cannot eliminate the shadow, We can only choose whether to meet it consciously or let it control us from the dark. The person who believes they have no shadow is not enlightened. They are simply unaware of the ways it is already running their life. Here is a question that might unsettle you. Why are you most offended by certain flaws and not others? Think about the traits that truly bother you in other people, not minor annoyances. The deep ones. The behaviors that trigger real anger, real disgust, real moral outrage. Perhaps dishonesty. Perhaps selfishness. Perhaps cowardice or arrogance or cruelty. Now ask, why do these particular traits provoke such strong reactions when other flaws merely annoy? Jung offered an uncomfortable answer. The traits we condemn most fiercely in others are often the traits we are most afraid of finding in ourselves. He called this projection. When we cannot accept something in ourselves, we exile it to the shadow. But the energy does not disappear. It gets projected outward onto other people. We see in them what we cannot bear to see in ourselves, and then we attack it, as if destroying it in them could destroy it in us. This is why moral outrage often feels so righteous. It is not just about the other person's wrongdoing, it is about the relief of locating the darkness outside ourselves. The person who rages against dishonesty may be hiding their own lies, perhaps not literal lies, but the lies they tell themselves. The person who cannot forgive betrayal may be terrified of their own capacity for it. This does not mean every moral judgment is projection. Sometimes people do genuinely wrong things. But Jung's warning is worth sitting with before you condemn someone for their shadow. Be certain you have met your own. And if you have, you will probably be slower to throw stones. The next time you feel intense moral disgust, pause. Ask, what part of me is this really about? If the shadow is real, then love becomes a different kind of task. Not love as a feeling that happens to you, but love as a way of seeing. A relationship can survive many imperfections, but it rarely survives the demand to be a myth. Jung used the word individuation to describe the process of becoming whole, integrating what we reject, rather than splitting ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable. And relationships, at their best, can support this. Not by making us perfect, but by making us visible. Sometimes a crisis, a betrayal, a lie, a collapse of trust forces two people to stop performing and start revealing. Not because betrayal is good, but because it breaks the fantasy. And once the fantasy breaks, something becomes possible: honesty. Some relationships cannot and should not survive certain injuries. Leaving can be the healthiest choice, but when relationships do survive, they often survive for a specific reason. Both people stop trying to be only light. They begin to speak what they were hiding: fear, shame, insecurity, old wounds, and the relationship becomes less shiny but more real. This is not easy. It requires mourning the idealized version of someone. It requires accepting that a person can love you and still fail you. It requires the strange courage to say, I see what you are capable of, and I choose to stay with open eyes. You could call this the difference between falling in love and standing in love. Falling is easy. It is carried by fantasy. Standing is harder. It requires seeing the shadow and choosing to remain. So what do we do with all of this? If everyone has a shadow, if closeness reveals it, if moral purity is a fantasy, then how do we live? How do we hold standards without holding impossible expectations? Jung's answer was not to abandon morality. It was to mature it. There is a difference between holding someone accountable and demanding they be something no human can be. You can recognize that someone did wrong without being shocked that they were capable of it. You can set boundaries without believing you would never under any circumstance be capable of the same thing. This is what integrating the shadow means. It does not mean accepting everything. It does not mean tolerating abuse. It means recognizing that the darkness you see in others also lives in you and relating to them from that knowledge rather than from the pretense of your own purity. When you stop expecting perfection, something shifts. You become more patient, more forgiving, not because you've lowered your standards, but because you're no longer shocked by human nature. You can say, that was wrong, and I understand how a human being could do it, because I am also a human being, and I have my own shadow. This is not weakness. It is the beginning of genuine moral strength, because the person who knows their own darkness is far less dangerous than the person who believes they have none. Understanding is not excusing. You can understand why someone hurt you and still choose to walk away, but understanding changes the texture of your life. It can turn bitterness into something quieter. It can help you leave without needing to dehumanize. The goal is not to become someone who accepts everything. The goal is to become someone who is no longer surprised by darkness, and therefore no longer destroyed by it. Jung's work eventually leads to an uncomfortable place. Back to you. If you are human, you have a shadow. There are parts of you that you keep out of the story, impulses you don't act on, thoughts you don't admit, emotions you quickly reshape into something more acceptable, and sometimes what we call morality is really just fear of what we might find inside ourselves. Jung's project was not to destroy the shadow or to indulge it, it was to integrate it, to bring it into consciousness where it becomes less compulsive, less likely to drive you from behind your back. You don't need a dramatic confrontation with your unconscious, but you do need a question. What have I hidden from myself? What part of me have I labeled not me? And what would change if I could look at it without flinching? Because the less we know our own darkness, the more we demand purity from others, and the more we demand purity, the more disappointment becomes inevitable. Jung spent his life studying what he called the night side of life. Dreams, symbols, unconscious forces, not to make people darker, but to make them more honest. And his conclusion is both sobering and freeing. We are not meant to be pure. We are meant to be whole. Every soul is half human, half ghost. Not because people are monsters, but because every person is more than their public face, more than the image you want them to be. If you understand this, you move through the world differently. You stop searching for flawless people. You stop being shocked when you meet contradictions. You become slower to idealize and slower to condemn, and you gain something rare, a kind of calm. The world will keep selling the fantasy that good people exist as clean categories, that if you find the right partner, the right friend, the right community, you will finally be safe from human darkness. It is a comforting story, but it is still a story. There are no purely good people. There are only people who have made some peace with their shadow, and people who haven't. So here is the choice. You can keep searching for angels and keep feeling betrayed when you find humans, or you can learn to see clearly, and then, with that clarity, decide what love, what boundaries, what forgiveness or distance should look like in your own life. See clearly. Love what is actually there.